Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum. We are excited to bring this information about local stormwater projects, information about the stormwater program in the city of Erie, and to discuss the use of artificial intelligence in the stormwater industry. We have audience members far and wide today, so I encourage you to write in the chat what city or state you're tuning in from while I go over a few logistics. First of all, my name is Amber Stowell. I am with Pennsylvania Sea Grant as a coastal outreach specialist in the Lake Erie region. And many of us are familiar with the Zoom platform by now, but if you do have questions, then please direct them to us in the Q&A. The chat is functional as well, but your questions might be lost if a lot of people are typing in there. So we do encourage you to use that Q&A box. If we don't get to your question today, we will pass them along to the appropriate presenter and share those responses with you. Presenters, you can also reply to questions directly in the Q&A box if you feel inclined to do so. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available on Pennsylvania Sea Grant's website within the next few weeks. So with that, I'm happy to turn things over to our co-host, Tim Bruno, with the Department of Environmental Protection.
Hey, thank you, Amber. And good afternoon to everyone. I join Amber in welcoming you to the May 2023 meeting of the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum. My name is Tim Bruno, and I work on Great Lakes policy and advocacy for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. For those of you who are new to the Pennsylvania LEEF, this forum hosts informational sessions that allow participants to gain a deeper knowledge and appreciation for environmental issues, specifically ones that affect our Great Lakes. So today's topic of municipal stormwater, both now and in the future, is especially relevant as our communities continue to face issues such as climate change, non-point source pollution to our lakes, streams, and rivers. We'll hear updates about harmful algal bloom monitoring and other water quality monitoring that are taking place in Lake Erie that are a result of non-point source pollution runoff. How the city of Erie is investing in knowledge about its stormwater system and ensuring that there's sustainable revenue and funding to keep it operating both now and in the future. And reducing stormwater impacts through planting trees. Finally, we'll hear from the Great Lakes Protection Fund and one of their premier funded projects that seeks to inexpensively increase our knowledge about urban watersheds, their information and their monitoring, and what the future of stormwater management may look like. Before we move into our agenda, I'm going to provide some updates from around the Great Lakes. Should you have any questions or conversation after today's meeting, I encourage you to contact me at tibruno@pa.gov or at 717-798-6001. So our first order of business will turn to invasive carp and the Brandon Road Interbasin Project. In our October 2022 meeting, I updated the forum on the threat of invasive carp entering the Great Lakes and the potential effects that could happen to the food web, the fishery, and the recreational and boating sectors of our economy here in Erie. Pennsylvania is dedicated to assuring that invasive carp deterrents at the Brandon Road Lock and Dam in Joliet, Illinois, are constructed as soon as possible to reduce the possibility of the fish entering Lake Michigan from that access point. There are some updates to this process. So since 2019, Pennsylvania has been involved with high-level negotiations between the Great Lakes states and provinces that has been convened by the Great Lakes Commission, Illinois, and Michigan to move forward the Brandon Road project. In 2022, former Pennsylvania Governor Wolf and 7 other Great Lakes governors sent a letter to Congress supporting 100% full federal funding authorization for the Brandon Road Interbasin project to be included in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. This is commonly referred to as WRDA. In the final language that became law, the cost share formula for this project was amended to be 90% federal and 10% non-federal. And so this is an improvement. While it's not the 100% that we were seeking, it certainly is an improvement and reduces the overall burden to the states and non-federal partners. So through the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed, it appropriated $226 million to accompany $47 million that the Army Corps of Engineers already had inside of its fiscal year budget. This will help the states and the non-federal sponsors and the Army Corps to progress forward with the design and engineering, get that finished, and this will be accelerated through a new start authorization for the Army Corps. On that, on March 29th, the Army Corps released the updated certified total project costs, which increased 12.9% to $1.146 billion, which constitutes what they consider a mega project. This includes a 52% reserve for contingencies that may happen from now until when the project is completed, estimated to be in 2032. The really good news is, though, in addition to assuring that we have a funding authorization for the amount of money that's necessary to get this project built, the non-federal cost share has really had advancements. Illinois and Michigan both announced that their governor's fiscal year 2024 proposed budgets had a combined $114 million. In Illinois, it was $50 million. In Michigan, it was $64 million. That, if passed, will meet the full federal, non-federal cost share of the project. So that's excellent news. It's really ready to move forward so that we can assure that we don't have invasive carp coming from the Mississippi River Basin. Moving on to Lake Erie phosphorus loading. So on March 22nd of this year, DEP submitted to US EPA the 2022 water year total phosphorus annual loading from MPDES permitted discharges in the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Basin. And those are end of pipe treated wastewater discharges that come from a variety of sources, but mostly sewage treatment sources here in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania provides this information as part of its commitments to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreements Annex 4 Nutrient Subcommittee, who keeps track of loading in Lake Erie of phosphorus and other nutrients, and also through the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Phosphorus Reduction Domestic Action Plan. This is a plan that we put together and finalized in 2017 and runs through this year, which we'll be updating that plan over the back half of 2023. And we'll be sure to include the LEEF in that process, as well as making sure you know when you can access those draft documents and comment on them. So based upon what we were looking at for loading, the point source and the non-point source data. So the point sources are all those end of pipes. The non-point sources are what runs off of the land in the streams and rivers and eventually ends up in the lake. You combine that from all the states and the province of Ontario, as well as what comes in from through Lake Huron and Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River. Looking at that, we've been trying to reduce the overall impacts to the central basin of Lake Erie, and the reduction that we've identified as a group, both from US and Canada and the states and provinces, is to reduce that number down to 6,000 metric tons per annum in the central basin. So that being reduced from the original number of about 11,000 is a big reduction, and it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting to get there, a lot of which has started in other places around the basin. But Pennsylvania's contributions to this are not very big. The 2022 loading from Pennsylvania from point sources was calculated at about 31.5 MPa, which it was an increase of 24% over 2021 reported results, but it was altogether not unexpected. What we saw during the pandemic was that we had significant overall reductions in loading, mostly due to less economic activity and less recreation and tourism inside the area. And so this increase is actually a return to normal types of annual loading patterns that Pennsylvania has had in the past. Looking at Great Lakes funding and dedicated Great Lakes funding, as many of you know, the U.S. federal government appropriates on an annual basis monies to help the Great Lakes. It's called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and this funding is directed through the U.S. EPA Great Lakes National Program Office in Chicago, and they work with federal agency partners and the states to implement these monies that come in on an annual basis. Now, as part of that bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed, there was $1 billion that was directed of infrastructure funds to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And US EPA has decided to focus this money on restoring areas of concern, these polluted hotspots around the basin. Now, looking forward, they hope to dedicate this $1 billion in a moonshot. That's what they're calling it, to reduce the number, or actually restore all of those places, those areas of concern around the basin, back to fully functioning by 2030. So, unfortunately, Pennsylvania does not have an area of concern. Presque Isle Bay was delisted as an area of concern in 2013 through a lot of help, probably by people on our webinar today. And we have continued to monitor that water body through various means over the last 10 years. And so this year marks the 10-year anniversary of the delisting of Presque Isle Bay. But unfortunately, we do not have fortunately, we have no areas of concern here in Pennsylvania, but unfortunately, we won't be receiving any of the infrastructure funding. In addition to that, the way that US EPA and its federal partners direct that funding for the annual appropriation, which is marked as it's authorized for $425 million in the next fiscal year. I believe the president's proposed budget was a little bit less than that. But the way they direct that is through an action plan. And we're currently on the GLRI Action Plan 3, which is the third iteration of the setting of these priorities. It lasts through 2024. The next iteration, which is Action Plan 4, will last for the 5 years following that, moving up to 2030. And so EPA is actively drafting this new document and trying to look at ways in which they can enhance not only all of those areas that they currently cover, but incorporate things such as climate resilience and environmental justice, and ensuring that they're integrated properly. So the final plan is expected in late 2024. There will be lots of opportunity for public comment, and I'll be sure to bring you any updates as they come out. And I think with that, what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Amber, and we can start with some of our agenda items.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. So moving into our agenda, I'm now pleased to introduce our next speaker, Jason Sayers from the City of Erie. Jason has joined us to discuss the City of Erie Stormwater Program, and he has really jumped in at the last minute, and we're very thankful he could join us today. So thank you, Jason, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Amber. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Before I start, just a check on the audio, and then can you see my screen?
Yep, you sound good, and I can see your screen.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. So here we go. So I'm here to talk about the City of Erie's MS4 program, which of course stands for the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Like Amber said, I'm kind of we have Sarah Pillman, our sustainability coordinator, and Eric Iwanenko, our stormwater project engineer, both who the last minute here could not make it today. So I'm going to get through this. I may not know every picture, so I'm going to do the best I can to walk through the presentation for you. So a big thank you to those two, though, that really stepped up and put this together on behalf of the city. So to get into it, what is stormwater? Stormwater runoff is the result of precipitation events such as rain or snow melt that flows over land or impervious surfaces such as paved streets, parking lots, and building rooftops. Impervious areas, which are often found in urbanized areas, such as the city of Erie, act as a barrier for infiltration and promote sheet flow from stormwater. As stormwater flows across impervious surfaces, it often collects trash, bacteria, heavy metals, and other pollutants before entering storm sewers and being discharged into our local waterways. We all know that maintenance is a very important consideration with stormwater, because without maintenance, really, it just is not effective for controlling pollutants. And so what we're going to show here are these are examples of city inlets, and you can see there on the right, we have a broken back on that particular inlet. So you actually have a hole there, which it is, it's a safety hazard in addition to being allowing items, debris, etc., to get down in there. Top left, we have again a part of a broken inlet with another opening, a gap there at the top, and then some silt sock that really is ineffective in the sense that it's at the back of the inlet. It's either been washed back there or inappropriately placed, so not effective. And then the bottom left, of course, would be a standard catch basin as it exists out there. But of course, if you have an active construction project going on, this setup here should have a silt sock and a filter bag in it, which is what we require if there's an active project upstream of it. This slide here, we see this is an inlet on the left, and asphalt has gotten down in the bottom of that from probably some type of paving operation. The center picture shows much more of a litter and debris, trash in the bottom of an inlet, and then the one on the right is various materials. It looks like there's some aggregates, some paving materials, and some trash. That's actually a manhole. So with the manhole situation, obviously that stuff got in there through an inlet, and then was washed downstream into a manhole. So that's why really inlets are your first line of protection against the pollution, because that's actually where the material enters the storm sewer system at. The next slide, again, as far as maintenance goes, this was a project we did last summer. It's a 72-inch, it was a 72-inch tile segment on Garrison Run, which is a storm sewer in the city of Erie. This is actually down, if you know Erie, it's down at near the Soldiers and Sailors Home. And this was a project that we worked with the DEP on. It actually qualified, I believe, for a waiver, but we still work closely with the Northwest Regional Office on this project. And what we did here was we did a shotcrete repair of about 750 feet of this pipe at a cost of $650,000. And this was really important for us because there was a cemetery in close proximity. There's also some railroad tracks, and we really had to get this pipe shored up to prevent any type of future collapse. We did have some beginning concerns with the structural stability of this pipe, so we worked with National Gunite to you can see this picture there in the center where we restored the pipe full circumference. So that 72-inch ends up being reduced at a final diameter of about 68. But as you can see, all the hydraulics and everything is greatly improved. So you really don't lose any carrying capacity, but the condition of the pipe is much improved in that center picture from what it was in the earlier photo, the one on the left. This is just a picture of some work that was just, I believe, some handwork where we had cleared some branches and logs and such from part of that same stream a little bit further downstream. And you can see there the picture on the right in the after condition. And you can see the guys there in the center picture just down there doing some handwork to pull some of those things out. This slide, whoop, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I missed one there, but moving on to BMPs, enforcement and inspection. This is the Mill Creek tube. This is down by the Erie wastewater treatment plant. You can see there's a litter boom on the picture on the left, which is used as a entrapment. And then there's a pit off to the right of that, which is then on the right side of your screen, where the materials actually get diverted over into that it's like a clean out pit off to the side of the stream, and then the city can send the Vector truck in and suck out all that debris. This has been an effective BMP to the point where we're preparing a project right now to install a couple more of these on a couple different streams in the city. This slide here, these are examples of some stormwater management systems. These are not, I believe, from the city of Erie. So they're examples. We have the top left to top right, which is a round pipe system. You can see the filter fabric with the stone aggregate in there on both of those. And then the bottom one, which shows some type of a strip plasma mall. These are open bottom chambers. A lot of people call these storm tech chambers. So they're more of a half moon shape with an open bottom. Again, you can see the aggregate bedding. Then there's a manhole structure there with a diversion in it and also an inlet. But those are not, I don't believe those were from Erie. The top left, I'm not totally sure about, but the other ones were not. Okay, this is an example of the top left being an active construction project, and then the bottom, the right slide, showing what can happen if proper BMPs are not implemented. You can obviously see there was nothing done here. So there's an inlet right there on that picture on the right. You can see the washout out onto the street, and then it's running right in there with all the muddy water. Then, as an example of proper BMPs, we can see slide on the left, we have a silt sock protecting that inlet, acting as a nice filter barrier there. And then on the right, we have silt sock installed down slope of an active construction project. You can see the compactor up there in the dump truck. There's a job going on, and then they have this filter sock installed and then properly staked in. And then here's an example of filter fabric fence, another BMP, again installed down slope of the disturbed earth surface, again properly staked. I don't know about that gap right there. Yeah, I don't particularly maybe like that, the gap in between, but the rest of it looks pretty good. Again, these are not taken in Erie. I think these are just examples. ID, illicit discharge monitoring, we call this IDD&E. It's one of our minimum control measure number 3 out of the city's NPDES permit. So we just have a few slides here of illicit discharge that occurred in Erie not too long ago. This actually happened. There was obviously not going to name the entity involved and the business involved, but there was a illicit discharge that was brought to our attention. You can see here, we have in the center slide and the slide on the right, you can see there's a substance that was being discharged illicitly into the storm drain. And then we can see a trench drain on the left with a substance, a catch basin in the center, and a manhole on the right. And these were all things that our team did. We went out after it was reported and we back traced it to these different structures to identify the source of this. And then the bottom here, I guess this was where the initial sighting had occurred. And this shows what can happen if when these type of discharges occur. You see this is an open water body here where it was found, and then the preceding slides I showed was where we traced it back. But then we worked with we got the health department involved and the DEP and the company, and this was all remediated and taken care of, and all the parties were on site full time until everything was cleaned up and done to a satisfactory condition. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. Appreciate everybody listening today, and I don't know if are we taking questions, Amber, or is that it?
No, we can take questions.
Okay. If there's a question, I'll be happy to answer if anybody has anything for me.
Jason, thank you. I appreciate that update. Looking at over the last roughly 2 years, the city of Erie has participated in doing a feasibility study. Looking at all the pictures that you provided, there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure, both underground and on top of ground, that the city has to maintain, for the future. And you have a couple of different concerns there. You have public health and safety. You have water quality, which, many of these waters make their way down to Presque Isle Bay, and, which is, really a focus of our tourism and recreation and fishing industries over the multiple times of the year. Faced with all of this infrastructure and the need to fund it in the future, you looked at fees to generate revenue. Can you talk a little bit about that program, what you found, the types of levels necessary to keep this infrastructure up, and then looking off into the future, kind of what your priorities are?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the question, Tim. So a couple of years ago, the city of Erie decided to really take a hard look at implementing a stormwater fee. This is a concept that's been around for some time. We've been aware of the city of Meadville, which did this, probably one of the first ones that we knew of in this area. And they had done this quite some time ago. And so the city studied it for a while. And then a couple of years ago, we really started to get serious about it, because we recognized that with the infrastructure that we have, we needed a sustainable funding source for at a bare minimum for maintenance. But obviously, we want to be proactive as well, like that project I showed about the shotcrete and the gunite repair that we did. So we brought a consultant on board to work with us to develop a stormwater fee, a program, and then all the things that go with that, such as a credit policy and appeal system and and all the different components of that. And when we had felt we were comfortable enough with it, we presented it to city council, and after some, we had, one of the things council had asked initially when we took it to them was that we establish a separate committee to study it as well, which we did. And then the committee met several times, and we took a lot of input from them. It was a good panel of people that we had from Erie that met. I believe it was monthly. We met for several months, 6 months or so. And then after we kind of fine-tuned a few things. We went back to council, and they worked with us to pass this late in 2022. And then the fee went into effect this year in 2023, and we just sent out our first billing, and it has gone well so far. We're pleased with it, and it was nice to see everybody come together on this and support it. We have a very reasonable fee structure that we felt was manageable for our citizens and our residents. So it's going well so far, and I think it's now gonna be part of the city's budget moving forward, where we can, have a budget every year that directly can address, these types of needs for us. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that, you're right, that was a long process. And I think, I very much respect the way the city went through public comments, as well as, addressing concerns of city council, of which there were many in that process. And I think what everyone saw was, really the generation of a comprehensive credit system that allows people to do the right thing, which is essentially reduce their stormwater inputs to the city system and reduce the overall impact to that infrastructure. Through that process, which can be contentious, anytime you impose a fee on a community, I think there's a lot of questions that surround that, and you need to justify why you do that. Can you give some perspective or maybe some of the things that you gleaned through that process that, really allowed you to get to that endpoint where everyone was in agreement that said, we need to get this done for the future of the community?
Yeah. I give you a little bit of perspective on that. When our committee met over those period of months there, city council had really pressed us to work on an appeal process that was fair, but more importantly, they really wanted us to focus in too on how residents could get credit for BMPs that they either had previously installed or else encourage them to install those. And then consequently, they would get a credit on their stormwater bill. So it could be, we have things in there like dry wells and rain gardens and such. And obviously some of these things have been installed in the city in the past as part of our stormwater management ordinance that we've had now in effect since 2011. So really, especially the past 10 years, we've had a large increase in these BMPs. But this was a way where the city residents could be part of the process, part of the solution, where they could actually come in then and present those and then get a credit back on their bill. It's not a big credit, but our fees aren't large. Our fees are very reasonable. I think the residential tiers are $12, $24, and $36, depending on the size of the home, the square footprint of the home. So obviously those are low fees to begin with, and then by the time so the credit, even though it wasn't large, we certainly had interest in that, and residents have reached out with us to apply for those, which is exciting, and even more so to see new ones get built, which was obviously another usually very important to us to have encourage them to actually go and put new BMPs in. So it's been a positive. So thank you.
Sure. We had a question about what a BMP is. That's a best management practice for dealing with, any type of issue, whether it be agricultural runoff or stormwater runoff, something you could put in to help reduce the impact, water quality, or amount of water that's going and running off your land. So something like a rain garden or a detention basin, or a green roof. Any of those things are known as best management practices, or once you get in this business, you call them BMPs, just because we don't have enough time to say all those words all the time. We had another question on the question and answer area, and I'm not sure if you're allowed to go into necessarily, what the source of the illicit discharges were, but maybe you could talk a little bit, how you discover illicit discharges, kind of what your responsibilities are as an MS4, and then, whether or not there's environmental or legal consequences that result from that.
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned, illicit discharge detection and elimination is a required component of our city's MS4 and PDES permit. It's actually requirement number 3. There's six of those total, and this example here was one that we decided to show because it was fairly recent, and obviously a lot of times, most of the time when these are brought to our attention, it's usually down near the bay or lake, because that's actually most of the city. If people realize, most of Erie is piped in. We don't have a lot of areas where we actually have open flowing streams. There are a few exceptions. If you've ever been to Erie, up like by the Erie Zoo and such, we do have Mill Creek. But a lot of times these things are phoned in or called in or reported because residents see something down near the lake shore. And this was an example where that happened. And then we immediately sent a team out, and they traced it back to I believe it was a business that actually held a industrial permit from the department. And obviously something like this is a violation on several fronts. And then at that point, we engaged the Erie County Health Department and the Northwest Regional Office immediately. And then we had in conjunction with the city, then we obviously put a plan got put into place very quickly. And then we got this, this was remediated and cleaned up. So I don't remember the nature of what this was. Eric and Sarah were more involved with that than I am, so I can't really go into any more detail on it. But I just know that it ended up with a good outcome, I guess, as good as it can be under these circumstances. But it was resolved. So
we're getting some good questions here. On the topic of BMPs, do you have any? And this comes from Carl DePolt. Any thoughts about combinations of BMPs? For example, a treatment train for stormwater management, particularly in areas that are brownfields or might be from previous contamination issues on the land due to industrial or other activities.
Okay, well, we do have a few of those in Erie. We have some brownfield sites. Most of the time with those, I could think of a couple examples. Again, I'm not going to name actual sites, but we had ones where a developer wanted to come in and redevelop the site. And so at that point in time, obviously they work with this. A lot of times, in both cases I could think of, they worked with both the Erie County Conservation District, the city, and the DEP on getting an acceptable stormwater management plan designed and installed. The department, I say, because I think the sites I'm thinking of, if you're familiar with the world of stormwater, both sites were in excess of 1 acre. So they needed to get an NPDES permit of their own. And as part of that, like I said, I went through the review of the conservation district. The department eventually issued, the permit was issued from the department, and then the city also, to ensure compliance with our Act 167 stormwater management ordinance. And as far as the treatment train goes, those are not necessarily mandated, but they're highly encouraged. They have to obviously meet there's a water quality component. They have to be rate, volume, quality, and in many cases, a treatment train is a good way to do that. May not be the only way, but it's a good way. So we certainly encourage that anywhere we can. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, there's good ones. I see one more up here on the chat. It's John Sebasti. He asks, are you allowing most residents the opportunity to use dry wells? That's one question. The second is, are you recording the BMPs in your MS4 reporting or GIS? And do these things come with a maintenance agreement?
Okay, I believe the answer to all three questions is yes. I'll try to hit them all quickly, but as part of our Act 167, which was actually, it was supported by Erie County back at the time, back in 2010, 2011, the city adopted an ordinance based on the county model. And there within that ordinance is what's called a small project stormwater management application, which is designed for, I believe, small projects between 2,500 and 5,000 square feet. And it's basically tailor-made to go in and you basically size a dry well or a rain garden using kind of a cookie cutter kind of procedure. So yes, we see that small project application quite frequently in the city for small projects. If they exceed 5,000 square feet, then they have to actually have an engineered plan. And normally by then you're kind of maybe out of the dry well category. So yeah, we get those on a fairly frequent basis. The BMP reporting, yes, we inventory our BMPs in the city and include that in our MS4 reporting that we do every year that we turn. I believe it's the end of September. That's usually due. And then question number 3, what was that one again? That was.
Do these practices come with a maintenance agreement?
Oh, yes. So not so much the small project form. I don't believe the maintenance agreement's actually in that one, but on the engineered plans that exceed 5,000 square foot of new impervious, there's an O&M agreement. It's actually a template right in our ordinance that we require that to be filled out and executed with the city. So good question. Thank you.
Yeah, all good questions. And thank you very much for the presentation and the answers afterwards. And, I really hope that the communities that are around the city of Erie, you're doing a little bit of learning for all of us that, as you implement these programs to provide sustainable revenue and enhance your stormwater services, there's a lot of growing pains. And so, I'm sure that other places that are looking at potentially a stormwater management fee will be asking lots of questions. But thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Amber, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. Moving on with our agenda here, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jeanette I'm so sorry, Dr. Jeanette Schnars with the Regional Science Consortium. Feeling tongue-tied today. Dr. Schnars is the Executive Director of the Regional Science Consortium, or the RSC, located in the research wing of the Tom Ridge Environmental Center. Since 2014, the RSC has monitored the Pennsylvania coastline, including Presque Isle Bay and local drinking water facilities for cyanotoxins produced by harmful algal blooms. The RSC also monitors bacteria and nutrient concentrations in the PA waters of Lake Erie, among many other very cool projects. Jeanette has joined us today to talk about the stormwater impacts of 2 local projects. So take it away, Jeanette.
All right, Amber, can you see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes, looks
Okay,
good.
great. All right, well, thank you for having me. I always appreciate being part of these meetings and being able to update everyone on what we're doing and what our plans are for this summer, we already had some of the interns start yesterday. The rest of the interns are starting tomorrow, so we are really in full swing. So summer is officially started, which is always exciting. All right, let me just switch this over into presentation mode. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to touch on a couple projects that we are working on this season. And the first one is a stormwater project. And so we are looking at some of the runoff into Presque Isle Bay. And this runoff obviously carries litter as well as other pollutants, especially from that urban landscape that you just heard so much about, and you know how these storm drains get plugged up, but how this litter and debris and pollution is getting into these storm drains and then coming out various outlets into Presque Isle Bay at different sites. So it could be anything from litter to that rainbow colored water that has, you know, oil or gas from the different roadways and parking lots. And so, of course, as this enters our system, our aquatic system, we're really degrading that water quality, the habitat itself, and even the aesthetics. And so we're really looking at that bayfront area being a wonderful place for tourists to go. There's a lot of development with the convention center, restaurants, hotels. And so to be kind of transporting all of this unsightly material down to this area that we're hoping lots of visitors are going to frequent throughout the summer is just, you know, definitely a bad idea for that aspect of just the humans being there. But then think about everything that lives in the water as well that we rely on and really value. So this is a pilot project, and it is really being led by Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful. And the person leading this is Don Benzakowski. He is retired from Pennsylvania DEP from the Coastal Zone Management Program, but he is now the Northwest Pennsylvania coordinator for Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful. And Keep PA Beautiful has this project that they've been working on and some grant funds where they really wanted to install something like a litter boom, or there's a product out there called a water goat. You know, they're looking at all these different things. And so as the different partners, including myself, Eric and Teresa Guerin from Lakeshore Towing, representatives from Gannon University, and Dawn, we're all looking at this. You know, we really wanted to customize it and make it work specifically for the sites that we wanted to install these BMPs. And so looking at it and using some of the expertise in our partners, really kind of customizing and building this similar to a litter boom that you might see used when there's construction projects on the lakefront, whether they're installing a dock or different pilings, something like that. So this floating boom, but then also incorporating some absorbent pads to also get to some of the pollution. And so the goal is really to capture, but not only capture all of this, but also to categorize the litter and other pollutants that are being discharged from 2 outflow pipes into Presque Isle Bay. Okay, so our approach is to customize these litter booms or construction booms that you might see in the water, and actually apply some absorbent pads. So if you were to look at sites that might have an oil spill or something like that, they incorporate these pads that are going to help absorb materials like oil and gas. And so maybe just, you know, combining those 2 pieces together, those 2 pieces of equipment. And so we are going to install 2 of these at Gem City Marina down by where Lakeshore Towing is based at. And some of the information we want to really target is, so what litter is being discharged, but also what litter is being captured by this system that we install there. So obviously all of those floaters, are going to be captured pretty easily, hopefully, but we'll find out. But then we have litter that is also not floating. And so that will go under the boom. And so what are those and how frequently do we see that happening? And then those absorbent pads, we're going to look at those to absorb those other pollutants and try to examine those a little bit further to see what we are capturing. And then also really getting a sense of the impacts of storm events. So when we have a large storm event and, big flow of water down the storm drains, as well as the other tributaries into the area, how does that impact the litter and different runoff that we see washing up there? We are going to have 2 students from Gannon University working on this project throughout the whole summer. They're going to collect data and go down to these 2 sites and take their nets, like an example of the person on the picture on the right, take long-handled nets, scoop out the debris, categorize it, log it, record all of that data. We anticipate that happening 2 to 4 times a week through the summer. And anytime there's a storm event, we're really going to try to target those days as well. So we will start this next month. Like I said, our interns start tomorrow. So we will hopefully have everything up and running by mid to late June. And then we anticipate continuing this beyond August. So after our interns are done, we anticipate them staying on the project and working on it throughout the fall. So here is the location where the 2 red circles are. So you can see Wolverine Marina Park Marina. That's where Lakeshore Towing is. State Street on the right side or the east side. The first outlet is right there to the west side of State Street. So we will be installing a boom there, as well as on, a little further west beyond that dock that's jetting out. There is another outlet there that we will be installing a boom there as well. We hope to, on that second one, get some information on the litter that goes underneath the boom as well. It's not really a very deep site, so we can't, have it go the boom the whole way down. There has to be some space underneath that, but we're hoping that we can try to also examine what is getting past the boom as well. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about our harmful algal bloom project that we work on, and just give some updates as to what we're planning on for this summer. And so one thing I just wanted to make a point of is that harmful algal bloom events happen locally. If you have heard of HABs before, it's probably been in the western basin of Lake Erie, that part of Ohio by the Maumee River, by Toledo. There is definitely a lot of HAB events throughout the entire summer, and they really have quite an issue with that. But we really have, an issue with HABs here as well. So even though it's not to that extreme, we definitely do have it in our Pennsylvania waters of Lake Erie as well. We have been monitoring HABs, actually the toxins that HABs produce. We've been monitoring that since 2014. And our partners throughout the years and continuing now as well is Pennsylvania DCNR, Erie County Department of Health, Erie Waterworks, as well as Northeast Township and their drinking water facilities there, as well as their reservoirs. And all of our monitoring since 2014 has relied on grant funding. And so when you look at places like Toledo, Ohio, where they had their drinking water shut down for a week, almost a week in 2014, they really demand and rely upon their township and their city to make sure monitoring happens to protect their drinking water. We don't have that same situation here. And so each year I continue to look for funding to make sure we can continue our monitoring. And I really want to give out a shout out to Tim Bruno, because he has been very, very supportive over the years and very helpful in helping make this happen. And so that's been really significant in the project. And we're very thankful and grateful for that. All right, so our sampling, we start sampling as early as we can in May, and we continue through October. We sample weekly. Typically on Thursdays, we collect the samples and we get results out Thursday late in the day and into Friday. We have increased our sample sites this year. So we have 26 sampling sites that are along Presque Isle Bay, Presque Isle beaches, and the Pennsylvania Lake Erie coastline. The two sites we've added this year are 20 Mile Creek over by the New York border, as well as East Avenue. So just east of the channel there where the bait shop is, and just immediately east of the old Coke plant. So we will be including those two sample sites as well. We also have another 7 samples that come in from Erie Waterworks and the Northeast Drinking Water Authority. And it looks like we will also be analyzing samples from Lake Enbro this year as well. I will say over the past years, we have processed samples from there as well as Pymatuming. And so, you know, we try to work with our region and the waters in the area to continue, especially if there's something that happens where the water looks very questionable and there's a lot of concern. We are excited this year. We will be able to continue to monitor for all 4 cyanotoxins. So the cyanotoxins are the toxins that are released by the harmful algal bloom, which is made up of blue-green algae. And these toxins are skin toxins, so they can cause a rash. Some of them are liver toxins and some of them are nerve toxins. And so we will be sampling, or we will be analyzing for microcystins, saxitoxin, anatoxin A, and cylindrospermopsin. So we are, you know, we've had to kind of vary that over the years depending on funding. But the last couple of years, including this year, we're going to be able to analyze for all 4 of them. So we are excited to continue to do that. Our sampling locations, you can kind of see on the maps. I know it looks very small because I put all 4 maps on one slide here, but we have towards the west, we have Elk Creek, Avonia Beach, and Walnut Creek. And then once you get to the peninsula, we have 6 areas on the lake side of the peninsula. And then when you look at the bay, we have several sites all marked around the bay. And then when we look towards the east, we have East Avenue. Like I said, we are adding Lake Cliff Boat Launch, which is in Lawrence Park, Shades Beach, which is in Harbor Creek, and then Freeport Beach, which is next to 16 Mile Creek. And then we are also adding 20 Mile Creek. So those will be our sampling sites. And then the results, like I said, we will get them out as soon as possible, but the microcystin and saxitoxin results will come out typically Thursday when sampling is completed, so late Thursday. We will post it on our website, which is also, that map is found on our website and the Erie County Department of Health website. In addition to HABs, it is also showing E. coli, or the bacteria that dictates if beaches have advisories or restrictions, or if it's safe to go in them. So we will continue to have both of those pieces of information on the website there on that map. Like I said, it's on the RSC website as well as the Erie County Department of Health. In addition to that, when we get the results, we push them out to our partners. And if a sampling location exceeds a safe level, there will be a sign like the red and white one you see at the top of the screen there, indicating if it is unsafe for pets or humans to contact the water. And so for sites around the peninsula here, DCNR posts those signs. And for other locations we're sampling, the Erie County Department of Health either posts the signs or communicates with the landowner manager to post the signs in those locations. And as of last week, all of our buoys have gotten out into the water. So we have 4 buoys that we deployed. One is there are 2 larger ones. We have one off Walnut Creek and the nearshore buoy, which is off of Presque Isle's Lighthouse. They are both in about 50 feet of water. And then we have 2 smaller buoys, one on beach 2 and one on beach 6. They are all now equipped with blue-green algae sensors, and so we are monitoring for the presence of the blue-green algae, which can result into a HAB event. And it monitors for other water quality parameters, including temperature and turbidity and pH and conductivity and temperature. And then the larger buoys also have a weather station on them, a wave meter, and a video camera. And you can find this data in real time at www.palakeeriebuoy.com, or you can download the app, which is called Live Data Center. I will say we just deployed them, so over the next week, we are definitely working out all of our kinks. Technology is not seamless when you put it out in the middle of a very challenging environment like Lake Erie. So we are getting everything up and running, but we are excited that we do have the blue-green algae sensors on all 4 of our buoys. It used to just be a couple of the buoys, and everything is out and operating. And so that is the end of my updates. Thank you again. If anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. And you're always welcome to contact me, through the RSC website or through my email. So thank you very much, Amber. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jeanette. I encourage anyone to type in questions in the Q&A or the chat. And I did add in those wonderful website resources, which include the HAB map from the RSC page and the health department page. And I highly encourage folks to go to that palakeeriebuoy.com. Not only is it a phenomenal resource for just, if you're heading out to the beach for a great day at the beach, you can find a lot of really cool information on there that'll just increase your knowledge of the lake. And I'll also pop your email into the chat as well.
Thank you.
Tim, do you have any questions?
Sure, yeah. Just as always, Dr. Schnars, excellent job on, really providing a body of knowledge about nutrients, about the presence of toxins inside of our waters. And all of that adds to the safety of those who come here to visit Presque Isle and boat here and do all of the things that we really love about this area. Looking forward, I think, maybe you can talk a little bit about the future of the program and how you envision moving forward.
Sure, absolutely. So the HABs program, that is something that is always going to be an issue, and it's really been elevated through a lot of federal agencies as a priority to continue. And this isn't just Lake Erie or even Great Lakes wide. It's, all of the ocean coastlines, inland waters. We're seeing issues everywhere. And like you said, a lot of this goes back to the nutrients, and the nutrient inputs are into the water are really feeding these bloom events. And we have to, better understand what the impacts of the toxins are. And so you noticed on the last slide, we have our HAB lab. We do a lot of education and outreach as well. And a lot of these toxins are very dangerous to animals like dogs, domestic animals, pets. And so just creating a lot of awareness and really just making people knowledgeable. I mean, it's, that's a big part of it. It is not that, it's not like it used to be when we talk about pollution in the Great Lakes and the Industrial Revolution and all that. It's a different issue now. And I think, people just being aware of what a HAB is, what causes them. Blue-green algae are very much a naturally occurring organism. They're supposed to be in the water. It really goes back to how we treat the land and how that runoff kind of feeds those bloom events. So my intention is to continue to find the funding to support this. My concern is that we have done so much in terms of education and awareness. People are really accustomed to seeing these results from, people that are swimming in the beaches or boating, or we have a kayaking club that pays attention, windsurfing club that pays attention to those results. So I would hate to have them have us not have funding, no results come out, and people think no news is good news. So we're going to continue to find that funding each year and make sure that we can continue the project and the program, and keep people aware. It's always good to know about your environment and how to be part of the solution and what causes problems in our environment.
And, one more item before we leave, discussing some of these stormwater impacts. I think the introduction of some of these measures to remove marine debris from the outfalls of some of our cities' stormwater outfalls is really going to be important in reducing the overall impacts to Presque Isle Bay. I've been hearing quite a bit, both in state and federal areas, about plastics and microplastics in our waters. And this is certainly one of those things that will help reduce the total amount of plastics that are getting into our system. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that and what the expectations are and estimates are that you'll be able to remove per year?
Yeah, sure. So we're excited to kind of pilot, maybe just customizing it a little bit and see what we can capture and how successful it is, and continue to tweak it into the future. And from the expertise on our team, like Eric Guerin, who is, owns or is has his business on the property there, he said over the years, this is really what he sees going on. And those people that are constantly there and witnessing what's happening are the ones that we need to help, with these projects. And so a lot of debris comes out. We anticipate that every time we go down there, we're going to be collecting, a couple large 30-gallon garbage bags full of items, and we're really going to categorize it. We're going to weigh it, realizing that, some things don't weigh very much, but take as many measurements as we can to really document what's going on. And we're hoping to also kind of get some analysis so we can get an idea of the oil or gas or whatever those other pollutants are. And if it does prove successful, or, we kind of modify it to that success, we're going to look at expanding that effort along the coastline, especially Presque Isle Bay and down in that downtown area, because we do have a lot of people. We have a lot of events that happen where people are generating a lot of that single-use plastic waste and overflowing garbage cans. It's really windy in Erie. Things get blown around, where people honestly just think that storm drains are garbage cans and push them down there. So we're hoping just to make a difference. And there's so many other people that are working on this same project and being very collaborative and sharing our results and working together.
Tim, you're on mute. Tim's on mute, but unfortunately.
I was just saying, yeah. Oh, well. Thank you to Dr. Schnars for joining. And also there's a few questions, I think, inside the question and answer area. And if you're able to answer those, if you can take a couple of minutes and do that, and I'll turn it back over to Amber to continue on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us, Jeanette. So next on our agenda, we are joined by John Vanko from the ReLEEF project. Since his retirement as the director of the Erie Art Museum, John Vanko has focused on supporting environmental organizations, especially Penn Future, Pennsylvania's watchdog for clean air, pure water, and a healthy climate, and the other LEEF, the Lake Erie Arboretum at Frontier Park, where he champions the ambitious tree growing project ReLEEF. With its many community partners, ReLEEF has distributed and planted nearly 40,000 trees in Erie County over the past 3 years. So John, thank you so much for joining us to discuss your tree planting efforts in Erie County.
Thank you, Amber. Happy to be here. I'll figure out how to share the screen here. And how's that?
Looks good.
All right, well, and I want to put a shout out to LEEF and the great team, Vern Peterson and the staff at LEEF, and all the people at the Urban Forest Committee, the great group of volunteers who work with Sarah Peelman, that I also sit on, and want to talk about. I go backwards. Talk about the problems of stormwater. We've gotten a good general sense of it so far, all the things that stormwater entails. And basically, the problem is the absence of trees. And those trees have been replaced by impervious surfaces, impermeable surfaces, non-porous surfaces. Basically, we've taken away the trees and we've put in their place things that water won't run through, and so the water runs off. That's the stormwater issue. If you look around our community, let me see, I can. Move that, okay. Can you, I don't know what you can see.
We can see a sidewalk and a road.
Okay, you can see the picture fine. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so if you're looking around our community, you'll see concrete and asphalt and more asphalt and vacant lots covered with grass. And generally speaking, trees or something in the distance or in some other neighborhood. Shout out to Sister Pat Lupo for these trees here. Thank you for having taken over a vacant lot many years ago and planted some fruit trees there. But that's the exception. We have a lot of impervious surface, and you might think, well, vacant lot, that doesn't count. Oh, well, actually, you know, you may like your lawn. But it's not a pervious surface by any kind of a gold standard. Yes, there is some water absorbed by lawns, but you might be surprised to know that according to research at Penn State, a forest can process 7 times as much stormwater as a lawn. And your lawn, because of the grassroots structure and soil compaction, can only absorb about 2 inches of water per hour, compared to a forest that can handle 14 inches or more in the same time frame. So a lawn is not a totally impervious surface, but it's not what we need. We need to be able to let water through. So we need surfaces that are pervious, permeable, and porous. And it's interesting that those terms are used in the context of paving. Impervious, impermeable, non-porous. For some reason, they use pervious and permeable when you're talking about concrete, and porous when you're talking about asphalt. But basically, these are concrete and asphalt paving materials that are designed to have voids in them so that water can pass through them. Unlike conventional concrete and asphalt, which is the water all runs off. A pervious paving system properly installed is on top of a bed of a large aggregate, which has spaces that accommodate water. And in an ideal situation like the one that's pictured here, they also have trees that both handle water as it falls, but also after it's fallen, they're the ones that pull the water out of the out of the subsoil and transpire it into the atmosphere. So this is a publication from the EPA, Stormwater to Street Trees, and it deals with engineered solutions to stormwater that support trees. Trees are really vitally important, and I recommend this. It's available online, and I've used a lot of the illustrations from it here as part of this talk. Trees reduce stormwater in a variety of ways. When rain falls on a tree, leaves get wet, the twigs get wet, the branches get wet, the trunk gets wet. You think about it, when it starts to rain, what do? You step under a tree. It can take quite a while for the water from the rainstorm, unless it's raining like crazy, to come through the tree and finally drip onto the ground beneath it. If the tree's in a forest, this is all enhanced by the buildup of leaf litter, and it creates a tilth on the soil beneath it that also absorbs water and increases the amount of water that infiltrates into the soil. And as I mentioned, when it's not raining, the tree is taking water out of the soil, up into its leaves, and then transpiring it, that is putting it out into the atmosphere. Hopefully, the tree is supported in a way that allows it to have enough water. In really dry places, stormwater is looked at as an asset, and we should look at stormwater as a potential asset as well, because it can, with properly designed infrastructure, it can support trees in places where we can't grow trees right now. There are a variety of engineered solutions that are represented here in this image. The pervious paving here, inlets, so that notice here there's an inlet in the street that goes into, not into the storm sewer, but into the tree growing area. The tree is supported by both structural soil and structural cells. These supports support the tree, they support the paving, and that permits the use of soil that doesn't get compressed. Trees need soils that are not compacted, so that they can spread their roots and absorb the water that we're talking about. Structural soils are mostly large aggregate, a large gravel of some kind, and they yield about a 20% void. So the spaces up between the stones of the large aggregate are then filled with soil, and of course with rainwater as it comes down, and they support the tree. Structural cells are a step up from that. Again, the pavement and the cells can be supported by these basically footers, these columnar footers that prevent the soil underneath them from being compacted, so that the tree roots have access to that. This is a solution that's employed in large cities where there's a lot of buildings and where the normal traditional little tree planting area just isn't sufficient. You know, urban trees have a hard job, and they suffer a lot from their urban environment. They don't live nearly as long as trees in other situations. And it takes things like this system, structural cells and structural soil, to support trees in those most intense situations. And it makes a huge difference. If you go to Pittsburgh and Liberty Street, they installed a system like this a few years ago, and it's great. The trees are thriving, and it makes a huge difference to have those trees in that intensely urban environment. So all these engineered solutions are work together. In that other picture, there was an inlet I pointed out that goes into the tree well rather than into the storm sewer. We need more of those. We need those in parking lots. It is so rare to have a parking lot in this community and in a lot of communities that actually supports trees and is designed with trees in mind. And that's got to change. That's got to turn around. These kind of solutions, of course, are expensive and they're complicated. They require maintenance, but there are others that are somewhat less expensive. Swales or rain gardens. Swales are often mistaken for ditches. They kind of look like a ditch, but they are unlike a ditch, which carries water away. Swales are designed to hold and absorb stormwater. And when a swale is combined with trees, they do a really good job of that. They absorb the water. They prevent overwhelming the storm sewer systems, and they provide all the benefits that trees provide to us. I mean, if we put some benches here, we have a really nice little park. There aren't a lot of these kind of treatments in our city right now in Erie. There is one I can think of by City Hall. It runs from alongside Peach Street from 7th to Perry Square there, where some of the runoff from the roof of City Hall goes into. But this is a kind of solution that is relatively passive. It's not as expensive as some of the ones that we've already talked about, but it provides all those same benefits when it's combined with trees. There are other solutions, of course. Most importantly, the solution lies in municipal leaders changing their way of thinking. Trees are infrastructure. Trees dramatically impact the quality of our air and the water. They address stormwater issues. They save energy. They sequester carbon. And they're just nice to have them there. They make people feel better. We have to stop looking at trees as an expense and recognize that they are investments, and they have a very substantial return on investment. We need to incorporate the economic value of trees in all our planning and budgeting for municipalities. Really important, we need to protect the trees that we already have, especially the large trees. And we need to favor large tree species. We need to be planting oaks and maples and tulip trees and hickories. So we need to plant big trees because they have a big impact. It's great that we're planting, LEEF, we've been planting lots and lots of trees, thousands of trees, literally. And, but the impact that they have takes years to evidence itself. Initially, seedlings have a very, very small impact on all these things, but it changes over time as they grow. But preserving a large tree has a much larger, it's equivalent, some say, to planting 30 trees. I've read 50 trees and even larger numbers. So preserving large trees is really important. I can't emphasize that one enough. Stormwater benefits are real. They're calculable, and they are money. So here's an analysis of cities across the United States and the annual stormwater benefits that they've calculated based on studying a limited number of trees. And those amounts can be quite substantial. In New York, they surveyed almost 600,000 trees, and they've come up with a benefit of some $35 million. This is an annual benefit. I got to say, in New York, I lived in New York in most of 1967. And the one thing that I remember about leaving New York was that I missed trees so much. Since then, New York has planted millions of trees, and it's reaping the benefits, as are other cities that are using trees to address the stormwater issue. Amazingly, stormwater isn't the biggest benefit of trees, although it's huge. It's about 1/3 of the benefit when you put dollar values on it. The biggest value of trees is intangible. It is property values. It's the enhancement of property values. And that's more than half of what street trees bring to the table when it comes to dollars and cents. And think about it. The most expensive communities are full of trees. The streets are tree lined. The houses are shaded by trees. And where do you want to live? Do you want to live someplace that's wide open with no trees around, or do you want to live someplace that has trees in it? It's an easy answer for most people. So I want to suggest another solution that it's based on our experience, and that is not just to plant trees, but to plant tiny forests. I don't know, if we were assembled together here, I'd ask you to put up your hand and tell me how many of you know what tiny forests are. I became aware of them in 2020, and we have planted one so far, and we are scheduled to plant several more in the city of Erie. Rust Belt cities like Erie are increasingly dominated by vacant lots. I find it really depressing to go to Detroit and drive what seems like miles past vacant lots. And these grassy lots not only require regular mowing for a good half of the year, but they're basically lawns. So we've already talked about that. So they're not very effective in absorbing stormwater. There are, in fact, considerable runoff from vacant lots, even though there's considerable expense for maintaining and mowing them over and over again. And again, to reiterate, it takes 25 to 30 years for the trees that we're planting today to begin to approach the benefits of mature trees. Tiny forests, however, grow 10 times faster than planting individual trees. 10 times. I mean, it's huge. Here's a picture of a tiny forest. During the we started the relief project. We decided to do it in the fall of 2019, and of course, at the beginning of 2020, when we were ramping up for our spring planting, the pandemic hit us, and we proceeded. It was good. At LEEF, we decided that we could pivot from our education programs and all the other programs that we'd been doing on site that you couldn't do anymore because of the pandemic. But we could go outside and plant trees and engage volunteers and et cetera. So that turned out well. But you know, the pandemic made me crazy like everybody else. One of the refuges was a weekly Zoom meeting with some friends, including a number of Europeans. And a friend of mine that lives in Holland asked me, after I talked about trees, of course, if I'd heard of tiny forests, and I hadn't. And in fact, they weren't so well known at the time. But at that time, they were planning to plant that year 100 tiny forests in the Netherlands. You know, I went online and I looked up at it, and there were some YouTube videos about it. Most all the information is about planting them in Japan. And
John, this is all great stuff. And some of the work that Relief has done, you know, especially through areas of like Frontier Park, has been amazing. You know, all the benefits that trees bring, these are certainly components that when you look at the real tangible benefits they bring to stormwater, but not only that, you know, aesthetics and you know, the cooling nature of them, especially when we're looking at changing climates, you know, it's going to be essential that we start integrating these practices into new places. And we're running just a little bit long here, so I hate to cut you short, but we need to transition into the next set of presenters. But one thing I just wanted to share with the group was, like, some people might not know this, but you have impeccable music taste. And John has helped arrange the Erie Blues and Jazz Fest here in Erie at Frontier Park, which is where one of our local urban watersheds flows through, Cascade Creek. And I can tell you that Cascade Creek, because of the riparian buffer that's there and the shading, you know, during that hot first week of August, when you have blues and jazz all around you, you can find roughly 25% of the kids in that whole place dipping their toes into the cool stream and just enjoying that whole area. So thank you, John. I really appreciate it. And if there's any questions for Mr. Vanko, please put those in the question and answer. And John, if you have a few minutes, just keep your eyes on that and see if you can answer those.
Yeah, sure. I want to quickly wrap up about explaining tiny forest. But the boy, this won't let me move forward. We planted this forest, about 500 trees right on East 38th Street on Mercier's campus in the fall of 2021. In 1 year, here's a tiny forest. This is the fall of 2022. So if that isn't impressive enough, I don't know what I can show you in terms of pictures, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody about tiny forests. Thanks, Tim.
That's convincing for me. I might plant one in my backyard.
Okay. Happy to work with you.
So we're going to move on in the agenda here. And just before I turn it over to Amber to introduce our next presenters, I just want to take this opportunity to really kind of showcase the Great Lakes Protection Fund. And for those of you who are unaware of what that is, I will not steal, there he is, David Rankin's thunder or lightning. But it is really a unique organization. It's a permanent endowment that really does good work. And it was funded in a way that is very unique, with a very public-centric focus. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of turn it over to Amber here. You know, I've had a pleasure to serve on the board of directors of the fund, along with another Pennsylvania, Andrew McElwain from the Heinz Endowments. And it's such a good opportunity that when you have projects that you think are transformational changes that really can spur the investment, would be magnified by many magnitudes of order. The fund is an excellent place to go to help develop that and potentially fund those types of things. And so I'll turn it over. I won't encroach any more on David's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to introduce David Rankin. David is the Executive Director at the Great Lakes Protection Fund. He is driven by a simple goal that his daughter live in a better world than he grew up in. He has spent his career in the public and private not-for-profit sectors to make that happen. During his tenure, the fund's endowment has grown from $94 million to over $140 million. It has launched over $100 million in regional innovation projects and granted over $52 million to support state priorities. The work of the fund supported teams has led to a 90% plus reduction in invasive species introductions, creation of 44 million acres of sustainable timberland in Great Lakes states, and new environmental programs in dozens of community foundations. New interstate agreements to prevent diversions of Great Lakes water, and other new strategies that improve the ecosystem's health. So thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
Sure. Well, you're welcome. And I will keep this short in that I really think Brandon and Bronco are the stars of the next segment. And I will just say a couple words of introduction. It's been a true privilege to work with these two over the last 7 or 8 years. We set out on a journey to do something that sounds simple, but those of you on this call know how hard this is. We wanted to reduce the capital required for managing stormwater and storm-driven pollution events, while at the same time increasing the effectiveness of those investments from an environmental perspective. And these two have been at the forefront of a movement to do that by kind of activating the very thing that Tim talked about at the top of this meeting, using sensors, controllers, machine learning, and other technology and technology-driven approaches to supplement traditional engineering strategies to manage our water infrastructure. Two things I'd commend you to that these folks may be too modest to speak about. One is the early work they've done on creating something called open-storm.org. It's a website that is still around, and a legacy of some early work that we at the Protection Fund did with Brandon and Bronco, like I say, about 7, 8 years ago. That work led to a publication in Environmental Science and Technology in May of 2016. It will be 7 years next week, guys, that this thing came out. It was their article of the year. And even though it's in a technical publication by the American Chemistry Society, it's really written in plain, apprehendable English and makes the case for the kind of technology interventions that Tim was speaking of earlier. I really commend it to you. They created Hi-Fi as a way to move penetration of sensors into the water space. I'll let them fill in the gaps. Suffice it to say this, that they are the recipients, because of their work in OpenStorm and Hi-Fi, of the inaugural Verizon Climate Resilience Prize that was awarded last year. They're changing the space we all work in, and I'd simply like to welcome them to the floor, and I will stop talking. Bronco and Brandon, this is yours. Good to see you guys.
Likewise, thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
We will share our screen. Can you all see this?
Yep, looks good.
Brandon,
Hi.
I'm Bronco. This is gonna be a talk about AI, but we figured we'd kind of start a little bit analog here and talk about machines. So in my second day job, I teach at the University of Michigan in engineering, and particularly civil engineering. We discuss a lot of the tools that are being used to build the world. And so these are just ones that are out there, but we have, funnily enough, like exams, believe it or not, for seniors. They're like, identify these, which sometimes I think some elementary school students can identify, but basically like, what are the tools and what do they do? And so there's, basically you get an exam like this, and you kind of identify what these things have to do. So there's obviously the ones that can, talk about machines here, infrastructure machines, some that scoop some that scoop stuff into other ones that drive stuff away, like soil, some that push soil around, right? There's very specialized machines, some that dig trenches. So this, obviously, as we go into fancier and fancier infrastructure, you get really sophisticated machines, including ones like this that we were debating earlier. I'm pretty sure like their purpose is to open the portal into the underworld, but we don't know. In any case, there's some really big machines out there. But the funny thing to me is whenever I walk by a construction site, no matter how big the construction site is, whether it's a big tunnel or whatever that they're building or like a giant building, there's always the people also with a broom and a shovel, right? Because there's a right tool for the job and there's a huge spectrum of things. And I think we're familiar with this from an engineering perspective, whether we're building massive projects like the tunnel in Chicago, or we're building green infrastructure or planting things in our neighborhoods, as we just saw. It involves moving the world around. And when we're given a pile of dirt or pile of soil, there is an appropriate machine to be used for the job. When we talk about the field of stormwater, these machines oftentimes are these big physical machines that we see around us, like this construction equipment. What we wanted to talk about today a little bit in the context of AI is, moving from the piles of soil that we have to move around to sort of create stormwater systems into what we want them to be. What happens when you get a pile of data? And particularly what we're going to talk about here is there's this sort of underused machine or underutilized machine, if you want to think about it that way, that hasn't permeated yet into the field of stormwater as much as some other machines have. And this machine over here is obviously the computer. I think a lot of us know that these days computers have the power of portal opening devices. There's just these massive things that can do so much, but we still kind of, at least in the field, and this is maybe sometimes what we see around, still kind of use them like the broom and the shovel, right? They're these really powerful things, yet we still somehow sort of are still not squeezing as much value out of them as we think we could. And so we've kind of wanted to contextualize this talk today, which we know is about artificial intelligence, about machines in particular. And the machine we'll be talking about today is a computer. So I'm just kind of tossing it out there. I know we're in a Zoom call, but I'm sure all of you know that AI is changing the world. At least so I'm told by my TV, which tells me these kind of things. So basically, stuff is happening in the world. And I think today it's actually making the news a lot. So, your smart speakers listening to you, taking your orders, my kids are being raised by Alexa and Siri. The world is moving at a fast pace, yet somehow in specific fields, and today we'll focus on stormwater, we're still untangling our relationship with technology, asking questions like, is it appropriate? What are we going to do with it? What do these fancy tools actually, what could they possibly do for things like stormwater management, whether it's tunnels or green infrastructure or whatever? And to sort of get a little bit more context in this is, you say, okay, I'm ready. I want to adopt all these things. And you hear terms like this. Somebody might be telling you, hey, what you really need is a digital twin, which if for a lot of you on the phone, like on the Zoom call, you might be wondering, like, what is that? We're in the same boat. There's a lot of buzzwords floating around. And a lot of times these tools like digital twins, which I'm putting my favorite movie on here, are really just buzzwords that are being used by high level sort of operatives, if you will, think about CEOs and others who are basically saying like, this stuff will change the world and you'll figure it out in your domain, right? But for now, digital twins and AI is all doing these things. But the question really becomes like, what does this stuff mean? Does it go beyond buzzwords and does it have some tangible impact? And so what we wanted to convince you of today, this is at least our argument, is that in this era where we're living in right now, where this stuff is like all around us in the news, artificial intelligence is not artificial and it's not intelligent, really. This is going to be kind of our position as we move forward. And to show you this, I kind of want to just convince you today that artificial intelligence is really nothing more than math from like the 1950s, maybe a little bit after that, that's finally found a home in big enough computers that can crunch some numbers. And so in the field of engineering, we've been crunching numbers for a really long time. It's just we're using different math to do this. And so AI, again, going back, is not artificial, it's not intelligent, it's just a bunch of math. And like any other engineering, we can figure out what to do with that math. And just a little bit of history, this stuff started a while ago. It really did start in the 50s when people got together. And I think this was at Dartmouth. They sort of sat down together and they were like, hey, one day computers are going to be able to do lots of cool stuff. And that stuff is going to be part of a field called artificial intelligence. Okay, and that's how they coined it. That's the name. We can go back and say, should we have called it something else? That's what they called it. And they basically imagined a world where one day, you might be talking to a therapist that's actually not a real human. It's a robot or somebody else who's listening to your feelings. Your kids are going to be raised by computers. I think we're almost there. You might fall in love with robots. I don't know if you've seen this movie over here. We might build robots to protect us one day, and hopefully they're not going to be evil robots that try to take over the world. This still hasn't played out. We'll see how it actually ends up. But the field of AI is actually very, very broad. It's this idea that computers are these general machines that are going to solve all the world's problems, whether it's raising your kids or whatever else you're interested in. What actually matters in this context is that this term gets overused a lot for a lot of useful things that we could be doing, because it turns out that there's this subfield in artificial intelligence called machine learning. And this is where the machines come in that we were talking about earlier. These terms get used interchangeably. And because we haven't fully defined them yet, especially in the public sphere, we just talk about them very broadly. The field of machine learning is actually what we're talking about a lot of times when we talk about intelligence. It's not necessarily about intelligence, but using machines to get something done. And that machine is not the machines that we're used to a lot of times in our day-to-day life that push the physical world around and dig around and build us our tunnels and our green infrastructure. But the machine that we're going to be talking about today is the computer. And the learning part that happens in the term is you feed a bunch of data to a computer, okay, here the machine, that computer learns something, okay, we'll talk about in a second what that means, and then it produces a model of the world. It tries to predict the future. So the whole emphasis behind this term is basically this idea that I put a bunch of data into a computer, it learns a bunch of stuff, it's the machine that's learning, okay, and then it outputs a prediction of the world. So here's an example of a bunch of math that goes into it. So I'll just toss this out there. This is the obligatory math slide for our, Zoom call that we're wrapping up over here. How many of you have used this before? Okay, this is like a provocative question. Actually, it turns out that everybody's used it before. If you've ever, that's just the math that describes how you fit a line in Microsoft Excel, right? Because oftentimes when we talk about machine learning, people like bludgeon you with this stuff over here to make it seem really complicated. But at the end of the day, a lot of us have actually been doing this already. You load a bunch of data into Excel. You put a bunch of dots in there and say, I want to fit a line to this data, because once I have this line, I can predict whatever I want using that line. The slope of that line is determined by a number. It's called the parameter. And basically what happens is you feed a bunch of data into your computer. That machine learns what that line is, which basically fits a line to that data. And it's just called machine learning, right? And once it learns it, it's able to make predictions. And so it turns out that Microsoft Excel and fitting lines, whatever your favorite program is to do that, is part of the field of machine learning, which is part of this bigger field of AI. And there's many, many more algorithms inside of this little orange bubble. It turns out that Microsoft Excel is just a starting point. It's like our broom analogy from earlier, but there's much more powerful machines that can do much more things than just fit lines to data. And that's what that field looks like. So again, AI is this broad thing of, one day computers will be part of the day-to-day conversation of what we're doing. Machine learning is the specific part that takes data and produces a model of the world. And so there's lots and lots of math that goes into it. This is like the sort of overwhelming slide to say each one of these bubbles has lots of math that takes data and makes predictions of the world. So just like you can fit a line to a simple data set, you can just look at it and draw a line to it and say, I can predict like infiltration from, rainfall or something like that. There's much more complicated models that can predict how to fit patterns in data, how to discover patterns in data, et cetera. So that's the field of machine learning. And I'll just leave it here. I'll hand it over to Brandon. I think our message for today is, before we start talking about some of the specifics of how we use it, is that in this day-to-day conversation of computers conceivably taking over, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's really not artificial and it's not intelligent. It's just a bunch of math that's finally found its way on a computer. Now, interesting things are happening as a result of it, but it's much more accessible than it seems, and it's because of the terminology that gets used a lot of times that overcomplicates it when it probably doesn't need to be. So I'll just hand it over to Brandon and talk to you, through this support, as David mentioned earlier, with the Great Lakes Protection Fund. We've been trying to work with some early adopters across the Great Lakes for quite some time now to talk about how they can chart their journey into this field. So if this stuff is actually accessible and if people can use it, who are the folks that are going to be using it? Does it actually solve real problems, or is it just a bunch of buzzwords? And so I hand it over to Brandon and to talk about how we, what we learned by stepping out of the building and kind of working with some of those folks.
Cool. Well, thanks, Bronco. So yeah, this was some of the photos of the folks that we spoke with enabled through the Great Lakes Protection Fund, and some of these other conversations that we had of just really learning like what was their ultimate problem and to be solved here. And part of it stemmed from just having access to data and this quality information. And when we look at the options that they had available, one of them was just doing it on your own and being confronted with this rat's nest of wires. Another option was the USGS, which is, we've heard is quite expensive and can be prohibitive that way. And just even being able to bring on the staff to add onto making that capacity in-house is, a challenge in itself.
Right. So before you can even process data, you need to collect data, and it turns out collecting it today is pretty expensive.
Right, exactly. So we set out to solve that first. And the way that we tackled that was by making monitors that were a lot easier to deploy and maintain. So, we talk about wires, and this unit is like totally wireless now, like no magic tricks, no wires. And the idea is that this is the unit. It'll be measuring the water level. It has a cell phone modem inside, just like your iPhone or any other cell phone. The unit pops into this bracket, and then it's just a matter of finishing the installation, is installing these 2 screws, twisting that in, and the sensor is installed and online, starting to send out data.
Right. So that's basically the idea of a simple water level sensor that can do your stream gauging for you, but doesn't require expertise out in the field. So anybody who can use a screwdriver should be able to deploy this sensor. And we put a lot of effort in trying to figure out how to make that easy to allow people to create those big piles of data.
Right. And the next thing is, even though the unit is there, trying to make it so that it's easy to install in a variety of applications that we've heard from in the field. So we're seeing that now this unit can be paired with hardware from your local hardware store. If someone can run down to the street, get some nuts and bolts and attach it to a bridge or the side of a roadway, even drive it into a post. And it's been useful. We've seen from left to right, it's going from spring, summer, fall, winter. Like once it's installed, and like it's meant to be there for the long term, to continuously start amassing these data sets to start informing their decisions on the ground.
Right. What do we say? So easy, an intern can do it. No diss on interns, but it gives them a lot of work over the summer. Like if you want to collect a bunch of data, it's a really, really easy thing to do now.
Right. So this is an example of now when these are installed, the type of data that starts to come back, and I guess the visualization of really what that mounted number starts to materialize in for someone, say like a municipal manager, when they're starting to figure out like what are they actually looking at. And I think that's really the next question, is they'll see a dashboard like that and like, well, how do I turn this into something actionable? So that's where this machine learning element comes in, and it starts to be geared towards these different types of applications. So we just wanted to go over a few of those. And so what we're looking at here is a network that was supported by David and the Great Lakes Protection Fund that was installed over the course of a couple of months, frankly, across 3 states. And we're looking at over 150 monitors for what it's worth. And I think what's more exciting is kind of the different applications that these helped enable. So one of them here we're looking at is a network of monitors that was installed along a river here in Michigan. And it turns out that ice jams and debris detection is an issue for someone who's monitoring tens and even hundreds of miles of creeks and rivers. So what we're looking at is the rising and falling of water levels, or sometimes they don't fall. And the ability to kind of look at that and see, well, what is normal and what's not, and the machine can now, this machine learning technique can help to describe, like, determine like if it's different from normal, send out an alert, and then say a first responder, someone from the fire department, can go out and inspect what the issue may be and assess how severe an ice jam may be in impacting a roadway.
Yeah, and I think we saw some examples from earlier talks where, think about stormwater infrastructure clogs, like that happens all the time. Debris detection is, something that can be completely automated by these technologies. So it's bringing to bear all the stuff that's sitting in our smart speakers and our self-driving cars and solving kind of practical problems like, hey, is there an ice jam? Do I have debris detection? Send me a message if there's something going on, otherwise don't bother me. Because people don't need to be looking at data, they have a bunch of other stuff to do. Yeah. And so what we're doing is building these algorithms that can basically learn if something's happening that shouldn't be happening, and then send out notifications to crews if needed.
Right. And sometimes those crews are on the ground. So this is an example of a site in Cleveland where we had a monitor installed, and here they were, there's a project going on for stream bank restoration and stabilization. So what we're looking at is just an initial time series over time of the rainfall and the water level on the bottom. And this is a picture of what that site looked like when the monitor was installed. And at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon in the summer, the crew was on site, and they got a 1.5 hour dump of rain, which turned out to be 1 inch over that time, of essentially a 10-year storm, if you will. And so to get that short amount of rain in that big amount of rain in such amount of time was shocking to them. And they called into the project manager to ask, like, should the water levels be doing this? And by being able to see these things, it's they were able to assess, like, oh, this is performing. So now this is data that feeds into algorithms moving forward, which can be used to assess, like, is this site performing as intended, comparing that with the design spec and the data that comes in to do that assessment on a more real-time basis, for example.
Right. So it's like post-construction monitoring with that added layer of actually, is it performing like it should or is it not? And if it is, don't bother me again. If not, please let me know. And so there's this aspect of just churning the data and benefiting from the, the continuous monitoring.
Right.
Here, I'll show you this one here.
Okay. And yeah, and this third example we're looking at here, there's a network of 60 monitors or so installed in Cleveland, and the challenge was, how do you identify where is it flooding across the entire 400 square mile area? So when we start looking at all that data, again, it starts to look something that can be quite overwhelming, just trying to discern like, where is the flooding occurring? How do you deploy grounds crews to respond accordingly? So now where that comes in is the ability to kind of tease out all these events, feed that into a learning algorithm, and then begin to develop a model, say, of flooding across the entire region or even a specific site, for example. And that evolves into something like this, where all of a sudden someone can take a look at one of these images and start to assess, like, if a roadway is going to be at risk, maybe the entire parking lot, or beyond that, an entire commercial complex. So that's where we start to see these yellow lines, red lines, purple lines, and start to really convey, like, what do those flood levels actually mean, and how can we start to target those moving forward? So this is just another way of starting to explore and visualize what the impacts on the ground may be through data, and turning those into visualization tools and communication tools to help inform decisions on the ground. So
yeah,
lastly, I think like that's the idea here of like taking the data from these monitors and then being able to convert those piles of numbers into something where it's actionable and something that just shows up in the palm of your hand, if you will, to create a more informative and a quicker decision, if you will.
Yeah. And Dave introduced it earlier. We've been looking at these challenges for almost a decade now, and we created problems along the way to solving some problems. So it turns out that if you make it really, really easy for people to collect data with, like, for example, these easy to use stream gauges, you have to do something with those data. And if you can't just plug them into Microsoft Excel and expect something to pop out of it. There's just too much data. There's ways to analyze it. It's kind of complex. Like, we're looking at that Cleveland example where you may have 2-3 years of data that you collected now. Now you want to build a predictive model of, the weather forecast says the following: is this property going to flood, like down to the property level? And to create those kind of predictive analytics requires the use of the appropriate machine, as we went back there. And it's okay. We have those machines available, and they're actually a lot more accessible than they used to be. And so I just wanted to close on this. I know we're running out of time here, but just to kind of close you, that's the stuff that's going on now. There's a lot more stuff that's possible. This just shows an image of, we've been not just working on math. I mean, I like math, we like math, but like, we spend a lot of time out in the field trying to really understand what a lot of these things are. And I think David was alluding to this thing that we wrote quite some time ago, where we sort of imagined, like, okay, now's not the time, but eventually there might be a time where, in the context of smart cities and the era of the self-driving car, perhaps stormwater systems are going to have some sort of intelligence embedded in them. And what does that mean? And so what we're looking at are future applications where you could do massive scale asset monitoring. So there's an image over here of Detroit where there's a bunch of sensors deployed measuring green infrastructure. And then you can take that data and see, how are my assets performing? Are they performing like they should be? You can create maps that sort of tell you, where should I place green infrastructure? Because that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, is not just placing it and hoping it works, but where are the best parts of the city where this is going to give me the best bang for my buck. So when we think about strategic investments and making sure that you're going to get the best ROI on your investment, having the data to sort of scientifically and rigorously back up, this is what it's going to look like, will give you more assurance, for example, where to make your installations. For those of you on call who are doing water quality monitoring, we talked about it, we heard about it earlier. A lot of times when we monitor water quality, it's so tied in with storms. And so knowing when to go out and take a water quality sample of nutrients or E. coli or whatever you're interested in, it's a little tricky. And so what we've been looking at are automated ways. So, in the era of robotics, where robots are driving themselves, could we create smart water quality sampling devices that only take measurements when it's appropriate or when it's regulatory required or whatever those things are? This is an example of an automated water quality sampling protocol that just basically triggers a little mini robot or automated sampler, call it whatever you want, to make those samples. And so then just closing off here, there's many other things to look forward to. I think David was alluding to it earlier. Just like cars drive themselves, stormwater systems of the future may one day drive themselves too. I don't know if we're there yet, but if we equip our systems with valves and pumps that actuate themselves in response to changing conditions, we can squeeze a lot more performance out of those systems. And so even a really simple thing like adding an internet connected valve to a stormwater basin and closing off that valve when the storm is over, we'll capture all that sediment, we'll capture all those nutrients, and then basically checking the weather forecast and releasing that water to make sure you have extra storage available when the next storm hits, completely changes the way we use infrastructure and has the potential to really sort of create real-time adaptation. We talk a lot about adaptation, but we're talking about adaptation here in the millisecond or second level. And obviously humans can do that, but we can also automate a lot of this through the kind of methods that we were talking about. So we just wanted to close this off by saying, it's kind of a lot of the technology is exciting. I mean, we obviously like technology, but a lot of times these days it's being used as a hammer that's going to figure out all the nails it can find, basically, maybe a sledgehammer, actually, if you think about it more deeply like that. But I think we want to just conclude by saying, there's nothing really artificial about a lot of these things. The thing that's going to guide these technologies is domain knowledge. So, whatever the application area is that you're interested in, that's a lot more important than these technologies, because the technologies have matured, the technologies are ready to be used, but there's much broader questions about what problems do we want to solve with them, and what impact can they make. So we'll just leave this up. We can close off over here, and we'd be happy to take some questions if anybody wants to chat. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's excellent stuff. And, just the possibilities going off into the future for this active management of any type of watershed, but very specifically urban watersheds, is exciting, especially for me as an environmental protection professional. For the last 7 decades, we've been introducing stormwater management into our watersheds with very little thought of how it actually all works together. And a lot of times it can combine and make problems even worse. But by looking at in-stream hydrographs, the amount of water passing through any one area, and then identifying active management of those valves that might be on impoundment areas to attenuate flow and reduce flooding inside streams, that has benefits that are above just, less property damage and less threats to public health and safety. It has very real water quality benefits with less stream scour. You have, less sedimentation and transport of non-point source pollution. So that's what makes me excited to see what the next 10 years bring in some of what you've created here.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we've been controlling water quality really well since the 70s, right? When we started building water treatment plants. Except those required us to do everything centrally, right? Like all the sewer water and combined sewer water comes into one facility, it's treated there, we can treat it to spec, we can change the regulations to improve it over time. There is the potential now to start thinking about watersheds as like distributed large treatment plants, where if you have that level of granularity of I can send flow down, I know what causes erosion, I know where my nutrients are coming from, to really start thinking about treatment in a distributed fashion as literally as a treatment plant, like something that's actuated and moved around. Now, we'll see how long it takes to implement those kind of things, but technically it's feasible. The barriers may be other things, but the technology is ready. Oddly enough, it's just finding meaningful applications. That's the ongoing kind of work.
Well, thank you so much, and I encourage everyone who's on this webinar, as well as those who view it in the future on YouTube, to check out hi-fi.io. That is the place for the center of your business, and also the Great Lakes Protection Fund at glpf.org. And so thanks again, and I'll turn it back over to Amber to close this out.
Thanks, Tim. I just want to close us out by saying thank you so much to all of our presenters that spent time with us today. Thank you, Tim, for being a wonderful co-host. And at this time, we're going to wrap up the meeting. The recording of this meeting will be available on Pennsylvania Sea Grant's website at seagrant.psu.edu. And if you have some time and a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate you filling out the form that I just dropped into the chat. This will also be sent in a Zoom follow-up email, and this just helps us to continue to improve our meetings over time. So thank you again to all our presenters. Thank you to our audience, and we will see you next time.